My name is Avery Callahan. I'm 41, and the last time I trusted my brother with anything important, I was still naive enough to believe blood meant something. Avery's playing spy again, Bryce announced to the packed funeral parlor, his voice dripping with that particular brand of cruelty he'd perfected over decades. Still pretending that government desk job makes her special. I stood at the back of the room in my simple black dress, watching 300 people turn to stare. Grandpa Walter's casket sat surrounded by flowers I'd paid for in a funeral home I'd arranged for, a service Bryce was now commandeering like he'd done everything himself. The American flag draped across the mahogany, the one I'd requested from the VA, suddenly felt like a prop in his performance. She thinks working for some boring federal agency makes her important, he continued, straightening his expensive suit. But we all know Avery never amounted to much. Same girl who couldn't even get into a good college. The mourners shifted uncomfortably. I recognized faces from our childhood neighborhood, distant relatives, Grandpa's old army buddies who'd specifically asked to attend because they knew what he'd meant to me. They were witnessing Bryce turn our grandfather's funeral into his personal stage show. And I could see the disgust in their eyes. Not for me, but for him. But Bryce wasn't done. He never was. In fact, he said, that familiar smirk spreading across his face, I don't think anyone here even knows what Avery actually does for work. Do you, sis, want to enlighten everyone about your little desk job? 25 years. That's how long I'd been keeping secrets from my family. 25 years of Bryce treating me like his personal punching bag while I built a career he couldn't fathom. 25 years of watching him take credit for everything good in our family while systematically destroying my reputation with anyone who'd listen. It started in high school when he told our parents I was dealing drugs, a lie that cost me a full scholarship to Georgetown when the rumor reached my principal. Bryce had been furious that I'd been accepted to a better school than him, so he made sure I never got there. I ended up at a community college instead, working double shifts at a diner to pay for classes he got for free. Then came the wedding incident. When I'd met Ethan, my ex-husband, Bryce had pulled him aside at our engagement party and warned him that I was mentally unstable and probably cheating. Ethan never told me about that conversation until our divorce, but it explained why he'd been so suspicious and controlling throughout our marriage. Bryce had poisoned the well before I'd even gotten married. The pattern continued through every milestone. When I'd gotten my first government job, Bryce told everyone it was just filing paperwork. When I'd bought my small house, he spread rumors that I was probably taking bribes. When I'd started traveling for work, he made sure our parents believed I was running away from responsibilities. But Grandpa Walter had been different. He was the only family member who'd ever truly seen me. When I was 8 and Bryce locked me in the basement as a joke, Grandpa Walter had found me hours later sobbing and terrified. He'd never forgotten that, and he'd never let Bryce gaslight him about who I really was. She's got something special in her, that one, he used to tell people. Mark my words, Avery's going to surprise everyone someday. Grandpa Walter had been a Marine in Korea, and he'd recognized something in me that no one else in my family bothered to see. Discipline, integrity, a willingness to sacrifice for something bigger than myself. He'd encouraged me to take that first government job, even when Bryce was calling it career suicide. Federal work is honorable work, Grandpa had said. Don't let anyone tell you different. Now Bryce was standing over his casket, using his funeral as another opportunity to humiliate me in front of everyone who'd ever mattered to us both. The truth is, Bryce continued, warming up to his audience, Avery's never contributed anything meaningful to this family. Hell, she couldn't even be bothered to visit Grandpa Walter regularly, too busy with her mysterious government job. That was the lie that broke something inside me. I'd driven 6 hours every other weekend for the past 3 years to spend time with Grandpa Walter. I'd been the one who'd arranged his medical care when his dementia started. I'd been the one sitting beside his hospital bed when he died, not Bryce, who'd been too busy closing some real estate deal to take his calls. I'd also been the one who'd organized this entire funeral, though I'd let Bryce believe he was in charge because I'd wanted the focus to be on honoring Grandpa Walter, not on family drama. I'd handled the arrangements through back channels, calling in favors I'd accumulated over decades of federal service. The honor guard outside? I'd arranged that. The flag ceremony? My doing. The military chaplain who delivered such a beautiful service? He owed me a personal favor from a classified operation in Afghanistan. But Bryce didn't know any of that. None of them did. So before we close, Bryce said, puffing up with self-importance, I want everyone to know that I'll be handling Grandpa Walter's estate and making sure his legacy is properly preserved. Some of us actually have the credentials and resources to manage these things responsibly." He shot me a look that was pure venom. I knew what he was really saying, that I'd be getting nothing from the will, just like I'd gotten nothing from our parents when they died. Bryce had made sure of that, too, convincing them over the years that I was too irresponsible to handle an inheritance. The funeral director, a thin man named Mr. Langston, who'd been extraordinarily helpful during my planning calls, suddenly appeared at Bryce's elbow and whispered something in his ear. Bryce frowned, then shook his head dismissively. "There must be some mistake," Bryce said loudly. "Avery doesn't have any kind of security clearance. Tell whoever's asking that they can speak with me. I'm the family representative." Mr. Langston looked uncomfortable. "Sir, they were quite specific. They're asking for Avery Callahan, and they mentioned this was regarding federal protocols for military honors." "Federal protocols?" Bryce laughed. "Avery works at some boring desk job. What would she know about military, anything?" The funeral parlor doors opened and I felt my heart rate spike. I knew those footsteps. I'd been expecting this moment since I put in the request 3 weeks ago, but I hadn't expected it to happen in front of 300 people. Director Samuel Cade of the CIA walked into the room wearing his dress uniform, followed by 2 agents in dark suits. I'd worked directly under Cade for 8 years, running intelligence operations in 3 different countries. He was here because I'd asked him to deliver something that had been sitting in our classified files for 15 years. "Excuse me," Cade said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "I'm looking for Deputy Director Avery Callahan." The funeral parlor went dead silent. Bryce's face had gone white. "Deputy Director?" someone whispered from the crowd. Cade spotted me at the back of the room. "Director Callahan, my condolences on your loss. I have something that belonged to your grandfather." He walked directly to me and I watched 300 people crane their necks to see what was happening. In his hands was a wooden box I'd never seen before. "Your grandfather, Staff Sergeant Walter Callahan, was posthumously awarded the Silver Star for actions during the Battle of Chosin Reservoir in 1950, Cade announced to the room. The medal was classified for 73 years due to the sensitive nature of the intelligence operation he supported. Director Callahan's security clearance allowed us to finally release this honor to the family. He opened the box, revealing the Silver Star alongside documents I'd fought for years to declassify. Grandpa Walter hadn't just been a regular Marine. He'd been running intelligence behind enemy lines, saving dozens of American lives through information he'd gathered at incredible personal risk. "Your grandfather was a hero, Director Callahan," Cade said. "And given your own distinguished service to this country, I can't think of anyone better suited to preserve his legacy." The room erupted in whispers. I could see people pulling out phones, probably Googling my name and trying to make sense of what they'd just witnessed. Bryce stood frozen at the front of the room, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Deputy Director?" Bryce finally managed to croak. "Of what?" Cade turned to address him directly. "The Central Intelligence Agency. Sir, Director Callahan has been running covert operations for over 2 decades. She's received 3 intelligence stars, 2 distinguished intelligence medals, and was personally commended by the President for her role in dismantling a terrorist network that threatened American embassies worldwide." I watched Bryce's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then a dawning horror as he realized what had just happened. Every person in that room had heard him spend the last 20 minutes humiliating his sister, a sister who, it turned out, held one of the highest-ranking positions in American intelligence. But she never said," Bryce stammered. "Director Callahan's work requires the highest levels of operational security," Cade replied smoothly. "She spent her career protecting American lives, often at great personal cost. Her cover identity was essential to her effectiveness in the field." Mrs. Delaney from down the street was openly staring at me now. "Avery, honey, you're CIA?" I nodded, still holding Grandpa Walter's medal. "For 25 years. But Bryce always said you were just..." She trailed off, realizing how terrible it sounded. "Just what?" I asked quietly. The room had gone silent again. Everyone was looking at Bryce, waiting to see how he'd respond. I could see the exact moment when he understood that every lie he'd told about me, every time he'd humiliated me in public, every opportunity he'd stolen from me, it had all been witnessed by people who now knew exactly who I really was. "The President asked me to personally thank you for your service, Director Callahan," Cade continued. Your work in Eastern Europe prevented a major international incident that could have destabilized NATO. The operation remains classified, but your family should know that you've served your country with extraordinary distinction. Grandpa Walter's old army buddies were nodding with recognition now. They'd probably suspected something over the years. The way I carried myself, the fact that I'd never talked specifics about my work, the mysterious travel that had kept me away from so many family events. Avery, Bryce said, his voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you ever tell us? I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd spent decades systematically destroying my reputation and relationships. Who'd convinced our parents I was worthless. Who'd sabotaged my education, my marriage, my standing in our community. Who was now standing in front of 300 people, having just spent 20 minutes calling me a failure and a pretender. Because, Bryce, I said, my voice calm and clear, operational security isn't just about protecting national secrets. Sometimes it's about protecting yourself from people who would use your vulnerabilities against you. I watched that sink in. Everyone in the room understood exactly what I meant. Besides, I continued, you were so convinced I was nobody special. I saw no reason to correct that assumption. Cade stepped forward again. Director Callahan, there's one more thing. Given your grandfather's medal and your own service record, the Department of Defense has approved a full military honors burial at Arlington National Cemetery. If that's something the family would like to pursue. Arlington? Bryce whispered. But, that's for heroes. I finished. Yes, Bryce, it's for heroes. I turned to address the room. My grandfather always told me that real strength comes from serving something bigger than yourself. He lived that principle every day of his life, and he taught me to do the same. The work I've done for the past 25 years, work that's taken me away from birthday parties and holidays and family gatherings, has been about protecting the freedom that allows us all to be here today. I paused, looking directly at Bryce. Some people measure success by how much attention they can draw to themselves. Others measure it by how much good they can do when nobody's watching. Mrs. Delaney started clapping first, then Grandpa Walter's army buddies joined in, and soon the entire room was applauding. I stood there holding my grandfather's silver star, watching my brother realize that every cruel word he'd spoken about me had just been broadcast to everyone who'd ever known us both. After the ceremony, people lined up to shake my hand and thank me for my service. They wanted to know stories I couldn't tell about places I couldn't name. Working with people whose identities would remain classified long after I was gone. But they understood now why I'd been so private, why I'd never boasted or demanded recognition. In the aftermath of the public revelation of Avery's CIA career, her brother Bryce tries to apologize, claiming he had no idea who she really was. Avery calmly confronts him, pointing out that his ignorance was a choice rooted in his need to see her as a failure. She then reveals that their grandfather, Walter, left his entire estate to her, having seen through Bryce's manipulations long ago. Bryce is stunned, left with only a letter from their grandfather explaining his decision. As Avery walks away with dignity, she reflects on her service and the strength it took to endure years of abuse without recognition. Months later, Bryce reaches out from therapy seeking reconciliation, but Avery isn't ready. She remains focused on her duty and true identity, someone who never needed validation from those who tried to tear her down.